The icy wind sliced through the parking lot of Crestview Elementary, rattling the flagpole and numbing any exposed skin. Snow had crusted over the sidewalks, a hard grey shell that cracked under each hurried footstep. But there, unmoving, stood a German shepherd, broad-shouldered fur, dusted with frost, and eyes fixed on the front doors. He didn't bark, he didn't chase, he just stood. Each gust of wind howled against his frame, but he didn't flinch. No collar, no leash, no owner in sight, only a silent vigil, day after day, and today was no different except someone, for the first time, truly noticed him. From her classroom window on the second floor, Rachel Turner cradled her coffee and looked out, expecting nothing unusual. But there he was again. Same spot, same stillness. Third week now, the children barely noticed, caught up in giggles and glue sticks. But Rachel She had been watching. Unintentionally at first, now deliberately. Her eyes were pulled toward him each morning like clockwork. His coat was matted. His ears twitched slightly with every shout from the playground. Yet he remained, watching, waiting. Rachel's heart thudded with a quiet curiosity she didn't understand. Life, for Rachel, had become a script of monotony. Wake up, alone. Drive. To school. Smile for the kids. Grade papers. Go home. Repeat. It was safer this way. After Derek left last fall, taking her trust and a shared dream of family with him, Rachel had learned how to feel ... less excitement, less hope, less hurt. But lately, that numbness had a crack in it, a small one, a sliver, and somehow it widened each time she saw that dog. Something about his stillness mirrored her own. Something about his eyes whispered of waiting, and maybe ... Aching, she told herself, it didn't matter. He was just a stray. But even as she pressed her lips into a firm line and tried to bury herself in lesson plans, her eyes betrayed her every day. They wandered to the window, searching, expecting. There he was. She started packing extra lunch snacks, then stopped herself. She Googled lost dog, German Shepherd, then closed the tab. She told herself she didn't care, but the truth was unraveling. Slowly and quietly, something inside her had started to move, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for it. She tried to logic her way out of it. If he had an owner, where were they? If he was hungry, why hadn't he left? If he was dangerous, why did he sit so peacefully? But each answer only deepened the questions. He wasn't just a stray, he was a mystery, a question mark in fur and frost. Each morning felt less like coincidence and more like purpose. It unnerved her the way he sat in that spot, as if waiting for a bell to ring that never would. And somehow, Rachel couldn't look away. In the teacher's lounge, his presence became a casual topic, a running joke. Oh, the snow sentinel's back. One chuckled. They should call animal control. Another muttered. But Rachel said nothing. She couldn't. Because while others saw just a dog, Rachel saw something more, something unresolved. And while they dismissed him, she listened to the silence between his stillness, to the strange rhythm he'd added to her days. It happened on a Thursday. She was late, breath puffing in clouds as she hurried toward the school, and then she paused. He was there, as always, but this time his head lifted slowly. Their eyes locked for a fleeting second. It wasn't just a look, it was knowing. Rachel felt the chill slip deeper into her chest, not from the cold, but from the way his gaze held her, as if he saw her. All of her, even the parts she kept hidden. "Hey, get out of here." The bark of the janitor's voice cracked across the courtyard, bouncing off the brick walls like a warning shot. Rachel Turner turned instinctively, just in time to see the flash of fur disappearing between the hedges. A dog medium-sized, German Shepherd, by the looks of it, vanished out of sight. His tail tucked, his steps quick but not panicked. She caught a glimpse of his eyes before he turned, the flicker of something that wasn't just fear. It was painful. Rachel felt her chest tighten. What was that about? She asked the janitor, who was already muttering curses under his breath. And lighting a cigarette. "Same mutt's been sneaking around here for months. He's a stray, dirty thing, camps out by the east sidewalk like he owns the place." Rachel said nothing, but as she glanced toward the empty corner he'd run from, a strange emotion tugged at her. She didn't know why, but something about the way he looked at her just for that second stuck in her mind, like a thorn. Rachel walked past the school's east sidewalk the next day, her gaze scanning the rows of bushes and broken concrete. Then she saw him, same dog, same spot. He was sitting exactly where the janitor had chased him off Back Street. Paws aligned, like he was waiting for something or someone. He just sat there, she whispered to herself, almost incredulous. Cars drove by, people passed, and still he didn't move. The wind tugged at his ragged fur, his ears twitched at every sound, but his eyes never left the school doors. Rachel crossed the street, standing just far enough to not startle him. He didn't flinch. He just waited, quietly, patiently, and Rachel couldn't look away. It took her 3 days to get closer. The first day, she stood from afar. The second, she left a sandwich a few feet away. On the third, as the late autumn wind picked up and the clouds grayed overhead, Rachel crouched low on the sidewalk, heart nervously pounding. "It's okay, boy," she said softly, inching closer. The dog lifted his head, eyes meeting hers. He didn't run, he didn't bark, he just stared. Tentatively, she reached out, fingers trembling, and placed her hand gently on the top of his head. His fur was rough, his ears twitching slightly. Still no reaction, no growl, no flinch. Rachel blinked slowly. He was letting her in, and in that still moment, under the rustling trees and the faint hum of city life, something passed between them, silent and fragile. That's when she saw the collared dot. It was buried beneath matted fur, frayed and worn. She carefully pulled it into view, brushing aside dirt and tangles. A tiny tag dangled from it, its edges rusted and bent. "Max," she read aloud, squinting at the fading letters. The name was barely legible. The address below it just a blur of smudged ink and oxidation. No number, no phone. Rachel exhaled sharply, closing her fingers round the tag for a moment before releasing it. The name somehow made everything feel more real. Max wasn't just a stray. He had once belonged to someone. Later that week, Rachel asked around. A retired woman named Mrs. Langston, who lived across from the school, paused mid-rake when Rachel pointed to Max. "Oh, that one," she said, brows raising. "He's been coming here for nearly a year. Every morning, almost like clockwork. Just sits by the sidewalk. Doesn't bark, doesn't chase anything. Just ... waits." "For who?" Rachel asked. Mrs. Langston shrugged, eyes softening. "Nobody knows. Thought maybe a teacher owned him, or a kid. But after a while, we just figured he was waiting for someone who ain't coming back." Rachel's stomach sank as she looked back across the street. Max was in his usual spot, waiting, determined. Rachel called every local shelter, starting with the nearest and working outward, when she finally reached a small animal control office. On the outskirts of town, the assistant pulled up a record. "German Shepherd named Max," she said. "Yeah, he was reported picked up once, but escaped before he could be processed. No one ever followed up. No one's claimed him. Not one call." Rachel's throat felt tight. Max wasn't missing. He'd been forgotten. And somehow, that was worse. That night, Rachel stood by Max's spot again, this time with a folded blanket in one arm and a small bowl of chicken and rice in the other. "It's just a blanket, ... It's just food, ... she murmured, setting them down. Max sniffed the food, cautiously at first, then began to eat. She unfolded the blanket beside him, smoothing it out. "I'm not doing anything big," she whispered to herself. "Just ... helping." But her heart was already betraying her. The next day, Rachel told herself she wouldn't stop. She had a meeting, an errand, a deadline. But somehow her feet carried her to the east sidewalk again. Max was there, like always, curled on the blanket she had left. "You're not my responsibility," she said out loud, hands shoved in her coat pockets. Max didn't move, but his eyes lifted to meet hers. Rachel sat beside him, just for a minute, then another. Then the sun dipped lower, and she was still there, no longer sure who was waiting for whom. Every morning, as Rachel hurried past the tall, rusted school gate, Max was already there, sitting, silent, unmoving. Like a sentinel, his amber eyes followed her as she disappeared into the crowd of students, but he never moved, never whimpered. Just watched, rain or shine, wind or cold. Max kept his post. Some teachers joked he was the school's unofficial mascot. Others called him a stray with purpose. But to Rachel, he was becoming something else entirely. At first, she hadn't thought much of the dog, a quiet presence among chaos. But now, the sight of him stirred something in her: comfort, familiarity. She'd glance back every time, and there he was, tail lightly tapping the concrete, eyes never wavering. He didn't bark, he didn't beg. He simply waited, and when the final bell rang, there he'd be, ears perked, tail wagging ever so slightly as Rachel emerged. Like a soldier waiting for orders, or maybe a friend waiting for home. What kind of dog does that? She wondered one day, kneeling to whisper a hello. He didn't reply, just nuzzled her palm gently, then sat back down. She smiled. The school day had ended, but something else had begun. Max had started wagging his tail at the first sight of Rachel now, not frantically, but with quiet recognition, a slow, deliberate rhythm. Not every student got that greeting, only her. Rachel noticed it one chilly morning. She was late, her steps hurried, scarf flapping in the wind. But there he was, tail in motion the moment he saw her. His eyes locked onto hers, and for a brief second it was like they shared a thought. No words, just something unspoken and deeply understood. She found herself smiling more now, even before class. Some mornings she'd crouch beside him and murmur, "Morning, Max, you sleep okay?" And though he couldn't answer, the soft way he'd tilt his head and nuzzle her knee made her believe he was listening. They didn't need words. Their bond was forming in the spaces between them, in glances, tail wags, and the stillness of shared trust. Rachel stopped eating in the noisy cafeteria. Instead, she slipped outside with a sandwich tucked into her jacket. Every lunch break, she found Max in the same spot, beneath the shade of the maple tree near the school gate. They shared silence and sandwiches, She offered tiny pieces of bread or bits of meat. Max always waited for permission, never snatching, never greedy. It became their ritual. Her voice was quiet, telling him about her day, the stress of exams, or how lonely she felt sometimes. He listened, eyes steady, tail occasionally brushing the ground. Those lunchtime moments began to feel sacred, a soft heartbeat in the middle of a chaotic day. And though Max never spoke, his presence said everything Rachel needed to hear. No matter how strong their bond grew, Max never crossed the school gate. Rachel tried coaxing him more than once. "Come on, boy, just a little inside. I'll bring you water." Max would stand at the threshold, paws planted firmly on the concrete, eyes wary. His body would lean forward, but something always pulled him back. Even when the rain poured, soaking his fur, he wouldn't take a single step past the line. It puzzled Rachel. Why wait for her every day and yet never follow? She saw fear in his hesitation, not a fear of the gate itself, but of what crossing it might mean. Like he was keeping a promise, or staying in place, just in case someone else came looking. And so she stopped asking. She simply sat on his side of the line. One afternoon, a loud bang echoed from a distant construction site. Max jolted violently, his body trembling. His tail immediately curled between his legs, and he cowered low to the ground. Rachel reached out instinctively. "It's okay, it's just noise." But Max flinched at her movement, just slightly. Enough to tell her this wasn't about the sound alone. Something or someone in his past had left him broken in places unseen. Rachel's chest tightened. She realized then that behind Max's loyalty was a shadow of trauma. Trust didn't come easy to him, yet he had chosen to trust her. Rachel couldn't bear the thought of Max sleeping outside another night. So, one weekend, she drove up, car door open, calling softly, "Come on, Max. Just for tonight, you'll be safe." At first, he came close, sniffing the edge of the seat, ears perked. But when she gently reached for his collar, panic surged. In his eyes, he backed away, frantically pacing in circles. His breaths grew sharp. His paws skidded on the gravel as he turned and bolted, hiding behind a trash bin, trembling. Rachel stood frozen, not in fear, but in heartbreak. Whatever memory that car stirred up, it wasn't a good one. She didn't try again that day. She just sat on the ground, near enough to be close, far enough to be safe. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. It hit Rachel one evening as she watched Max scanning the faces of passing strangers with desperate, hopeful eyes. He wasn't just there for her. He was waiting for someone else. Maybe someone who once walked through that same school gate. Someone he'd followed until they stopped showing up. Rachel's chest ached. She was part of his present, but his heart, it was still tethered to a ghost from the past. Still, he never left. He waited, because hope, however faint, was his anchor. And that kind of hope doesn't fade easily. Rachel couldn't stop thinking about it. She began losing sleep, replaying Max's behavior in her mind like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't fit together. What happened to him? Who had he lost? She started asking questions casually at first. Her friends shrugged, her teachers waved it off, but Rachel couldn't let it go. She scrolled through lost pet reports, checked old posts on community pages, zoomed in on yearbook photos from years past. Every unanswered question pulled her deeper. Max had become more than just a dog at the gate. He was a mystery that gripped her heart, and she wasn't going to stop until she found the truth. Rachel visited the school's old archive room during her free period. Dusty yearbooks, attendance logs, event flyers from years ago. She flipped through page after page, hoping to stumble across a name, a photo, anything. She also searched local newspaper articles, accidents, missing persons, abandoned pets. One report mentioned a tragic car crash 3 years ago. A student and her father never made it. There was no dog mentioned, but Rachel's gut twisted. Could Max be connected? She printed the article and stared at the headline, her hands trembling. The truth felt close, now like a whisper just beyond. Rachel finally approached Mr. Coleman, the school's oldest staff member. His eyes lit up when she mentioned the dog. "You mean Max?" "He's been around for years," he said, rubbing his chin. "Used to follow a girl named Lila. Sweet kid, always fed him crackers." Rachel's breath caught Lila, a name, a thread. "She doesn't go here anymore?" Rachel asked, already knowing the answer. Mr. Coleman's expression darkened. "No, sweetheart. She's gone." Max hadn't forgotten, and now, neither could Rachel. The more Rachel learned about Max, the more she began to feel pieces of herself unraveling. She remembered her own childhood the day her dad left, her mother's silence, the feeling of being invisible. She had buried it deep, focused on school, on survival. But Max, in all his waiting, made her remember what it felt like to be left behind. She saw herself in his patience, in his pain. The bond wasn't just about comfort anymore. It was about healing. Two broken souls meeting in the wreckage, silently stitching each other together, without even realizing. Rachel had begun to crack open. One afternoon, as the wind tugged at her coat, Rachel looked into Max's eyes and saw something raw staring back. It wasn't just trust. It was a reflection. She saw her younger self waiting on a doorstep, clutching a backpack, hoping for someone who never came. And now, Max was doing the same. She knelt beside him, pressing her forehead gently to his. "We're both waiting," she whispered. He didn't move, just closed his eyes, to souls each other's mirror. Rachel's search led her to Leela's old home, long since sold. She found a neighbor willing to talk. The story spilled out how the family had adopted Max from a shelter, how Lila and Max were inseparable, how the crash had taken Lila and her father. The mother had been hospitalized for months. By the time she recovered, Max had run away. He came back to the last place they were hold a school gate. Rachel stood outside the house for a long time, the truth sinking in like cold rain. Max wasn't just a stray. He was the keeper of a promise he had waited all this time. Not because he didn't have anywhere to go, but because he still believed she'd return. Rachel sobbed quietly. This wasn't just Max's story anymore. It was hers too. They were both survivors of silence, both left behind, but maybe they didn't have to stay that way. Rachel wasn't looking for answers. She had come to the library to escape her own thoughts. But as she idly flipped through a dusty stack of old-school newsletters, one crumpled page caught her attention. The edges were torn, the print faded, but one headline stopped her cold. "Memorial held for young student killed in crash," her breath hitched. The photo below showed a boy no older than 8. His smile wide and gap-toothed, his arm wrapped tightly around a familiar German shepherd, Daniel and Max. The date 4 years ago landed like a hammer to her chest. The article was brief, clinical. Even a tragic accident. A promise made at school pickup. He never made it. The boy died, and the dog. He was found waiting at the gates the next morning. Rachel gripped the paper like it was alive. Oh, Max. Now the pieces began to form a story to heartbreaking. To Bear she didn't adopt a stray. She had walked into the life of a soul who never stopped waiting. The cold, hard truth unraveled like a slow-motion nightmare. Daniel, the boy in the photo, was Max's person, his world, a bond unbreakable even in death. The newsletter mentioned how Daniel insisted Max walk with him to school every day. The principal recalled the boy's final words before he ran inside. "Wait for me, buddy. I'll be back." For simple words, but dogs don't understand death. They only understand loyalty. Max had waited, day after day, season after season. Through rain, through snow, through blistering heat, Rachel couldn't breathe. The air felt thick with the weight of unspoken grief. No wonder Max had stared so longingly at the school gate. No wonder he refused to follow her home, unless she tugged on the leash. She had thought she was rescuing him, but he had never stopped holding on to a promise, made by a little boy who never came back. Rachel's heart ached as she pieced it all together. Max hadn't just been waiting, he'd been obeying. That one command, "Wait for me," was Max's entire world. Every morning, without fail, he trotted to the same spot by the rusted gates of the now-closed elementary school. He never barked, never whined. He just sat, alert and motionless, eyes fixed on the front steps. He didn't need a leash. The invisible tether of loyalty kept him rooted. She realized then he wasn't broken. He was faithful to the end. Rachel knelt beside Max that afternoon, brushing her hand gently over his fur. "You were just doing what he told you to do, weren't you?" Max didn't move, but his ears twitched just slightly. He was still waiting. Rachel returned the next morning. This time, she didn't bring a leash, just her heart. She sat beside Max on the cold concrete steps, the winter wind curling round them. Her fingers trembled as they reached for his paw. "Max, he's not coming back," she whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of sorrow. "Daniel's gone, sweetheart." She sobbed into the wool of her coat. Max stayed still. "I know you loved him. I know you're still waiting, but he would want you to be happy. He'd want you to be warm, to be loved." Max didn't move, because love to him meant staying, meant keeping a promise even if it broke his heart, as if the heavens themselves wept with them. Dark clouds rolled in fast, thick, angry, unforgiving. The wind howled. Lightning cracked across the sky, and the school's emergency system blared a warning. Everyone was ushered out, doors locked, streets cleared. Rachel turned to call Max, but he was gone. No barking, no sound, ... vanished. She screamed his name, spinning in circles, peering through the thickening snow. "Max, Max." But the schoolyard was empty, swallowed by the storm. It was as if Max had taken one last look at the steps and chased a ghost into the night. Hours passed. Rachel's voice had gone hoarse from calling. Her feet were numb. Her face burned from the cold. But there was no sign of Max. Not at the gate. Not at the stairs. Not along the streets or alleyways. The spot he had guarded so faithfully for years was empty. Rachel collapsed onto the icy bench across from the school, panic settling like a boulder in her chest. "What if he's gone?" she whispered. The wind didn't answer. It just howled louder. A faint whimper broke through the winds, brittle, like the final flicker of a flame. Rachel turned sharply, heart hammering. She followed the sound past the school fence into the back playground. There, beneath the old slide where rust had long eaten the metal, she found him. Max collapsed, his body curled tight, chest rising in shallow, labored breaths. Snow crusted his fur. His paws were raw. His eyes, once so sharp or flitted, but they fluttered when she called his name. He had returned to the last place Daniel played, still waiting, still loyal. Rachel dropped to her knees, cradling him. "Oh God, Max, don't do this. Don't. Leave me too." His head barely lifted, and still he wagged his tail. Rachel didn't remember the drive, only the frantic rhythm of Max's chest against hers. The way she whispered "stay with me" over and over, like a prayer and a plea all at once. She burst through the vet's doors, screaming, "Help us! He's freezing!" The nurses acted fast, but time was thin. Rachel sat in the waiting room, hands clasped, knuckles white. Her heart beat a panicked rhythm against the sterile walls. "Come on, Max," she whispered. "You've waited long enough. It's your turn to be saved." The room was quiet now. Max lay on the blanket beside her, an IV in his leg, a heater humming softly nearby. He looked so small. "I'm so tired." Rachel held his paw gently, her thumb tracing circles in silence. "I know you miss him," she said softly, eyes misting. "But maybe it's okay to let go of the waiting." She looked at the ceiling, swallowing a sob. "I'm not asking you to forget him. I never could, but maybe you could love someone new. Maybe you could stay with me outside." The storm passed. The wind eased. The snowflakes softened. Rachel rested her forehead against Max's, her voice a whisper. "For Daniel, and for you, please stay." And somewhere, in that quiet space between grief and healing, Max stirred and let out the softest sigh of peace. The sterile smell of antiseptic filled the quiet vet room, but Rachel only noticed the silence. Her fingers curled around Max's paw, trembling. Machines beeped softly. The night had been long, every hour stretched like a lifetime. Then a flicker. Max's eyes, dull for days, fluttered open barely, but enough. Rachel froze. Her heart slammed in her chest as his gaze found hers, cloudy yet familiar. His tail, wrapped around him like a question mark, gave the slightest twitch. It wasn't much, but to her, it was everything. A sob broke from her lips. Relief, part disbelief. "You're still with me," she whispered. Max gave a faint, tired huff, like he was telling her, "I'm not done yet." The storm had passed. For now, they had time. Rachel carried Max through the front door, the winter sun casting long golden streaks across the floor. He was lighter, now thinner, slower but safe. Inside, the house felt warmer, as if it had been holding its breath, too. She placed him gently on a soft new dog bed near the fireplace. A bowl of warm broth waited nearby. Max sniffed it, then looked up at her with quiet trust before drinking slowly. The silence was no longer heavy, it was peaceful. Rachel sat beside him, resting her hand on his back. "This is your home now," she murmured. "No more running, no more searching. Just the soft crackle of firelight and the quiet comfort of knowing he finally belonged." Spring arrived gently, carrying hope with every bloom. At the school Daniel once attended, a quiet garden had begun to take shape. A stone path curved through wildflowers and small benches. At its heart lay a flat memorial stone etched with Daniel's name, and beside it, a paw print. Max's. Rachel stood silently as students, teachers, and parents gathered for the dedication. Max lay at her feet, calm and still, as if he understood. This wasn't just a garden. It was a promise kept, a place to remember a boy whose heart had loved deeply, and a dog who had waited faithfully. Love had outlived the silence, and it would continue to grow here. One morning, as Rachel tied her boots for a short hike, Max nudged her elbow with his snout playful, insistent. She laughed, surprised by the sound. It had been too long. They walked the wooded trail, Max's ears perked, tail wagging with a joy she hadn't seen in him for months. Rachel inhaled the pine-scented air, feeling the knot in her chest begin to loosen. They paused at a creek. Max stepped in, splashing, and Rachel giggled when he shook off next to her, soaking her jacket. Each moment like this stitched her back together, hike by hike, sunrise by sunrise. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was healing. Volunteering hadn't been part of the plan. But when Rachel heard about the animal shelter's need for comfort visits, something tugged at her. Max walked confidently into the first shelter room, approaching a young girl curled into herself. Without hesitation, he placed his chin on her knee. Slowly, she reached out, touching his head. Rachel watched, eyes misty. They began making weekly visits to shelters, to hospice centers, and every Sunday, to Daniel's grave. Rachel would sit quietly beside the headstone, Max lying faithfully next to her. "We're still making him proud, aren't we?" She'd whisper. Max never answered, but she didn't need him to. Together, they were giving the kind of love they had once lost and found again. Snow blanketed the schoolyard like a memory. Rachel stood at the old gate, the one Max had waited beside for days after Daniel's death. This time, Max stood tall beside her, aged but dignified. He stared through, the bars not searching, but remembering. Rachel knelt, brushing her hand over his graying fur. "You came back one last time," she whispered. "But you're not waiting anymore, are you?" Max blinked slowly, then turned his head to her. No urgency, no tension, just peace. They stayed like that, the wind wrapping around them softly. The school bell rang faintly in the distance. Rachel rose, brushing snow from her coat. Max stepped forward beside her, leaving behind only paw prints. Together they walked away, not forgetting, but moving forward. The past had been honored, the promise fulfilled. The sky was beginning to darken when Rachel paused on the sidewalk. Max trotted a few steps ahead, then stopped, looking back. Their eyes met. She smiled. "Let's go home." This time, Max didn't linger. No glancing over his shoulder, no backward steps. He padded forward confidently, tail swaying gently, as if the wind itself carried the weight of closure. Home wasn't just a place anymore. It was a feeling. Rachel opened the door, and Max walked in like he belonged, as he always had. She watched him curl up in his bed, one paw tucked beneath his chin. She sank into the couch nearby, her heart finally still. They had journeyed through grief, silence, and memory. And now, hand and paw, they had arrived at something new. Not a replacement, not an ending, a beginning. Because love real ends, it simply leads the way home. The house was quiet now, the kind of silence that didn't ache anymore but felt full, like a breath held between heartbeats. Rachel knelt beside Max on the worn rug by the fireplace. Her fingers gently moved through his fur, slow and steady, as tears welled in her eyes, not from pain this time, but from something deeper. Gratitude, love, peace. They had weathered storms, both inside and out. The woman who once couldn't, Face mornings now found comfort in the warmth of a dog who had once been just as lost. Somehow, they had stitched their broken pieces together. Rachel looked into Max's eyes, those deep, knowing eyes that had watched her cry, laugh, fall apart, and rebuild. He didn't need to speak. He never had. His gaze said everything. It told of his own journey from fear to faith, from hunger to home. Max had stayed through it all not because he was told to, but because he wanted to. That silent vow, unspoken, yet unshakable, was something no person had ever given her before. And now she knew real love didn't come in grand gestures, but in quiet, unwavering presence. Some days they walked without speaking. The crunch of gravel beneath their feet, the wind whispering through the trees, that was enough. Rachel came to understand that healing didn't arrive like a storm or a sunrise. It was quieter, gentler. It lived in the daily routine, the shared space, the way Max would press his body close when she sat on the porch alone. No need for questions. No need for answers. Just presence, just being. And that, somehow, was enough. Rachel once scoffed at the idea of second chances. She thought life handed out pain, not redemptions. But Max changed that. Every wag of his tail, every loyal glance, reminded her that she was already living the second chance she never believed in. She wasn't the woman who gave up anymore. And Max, he wasn't the abandoned soul on a frozen doorstep. Together, they were proof that broken things don't stay. Broken forever not when love decides to stay. Max never left. Not when Rachel pushed him away. Not when the nightmares came back. He stayed because real love remembers who you are beneath the scars. And Rachel, she stayed, too. For once, not running, not hiding, not bracing for loss, she stayed. Because Max had shown her what it meant to be seen and remembered. In his eyes, she wasn't broken. She was home, and now, she finally believed she was worth staying for. They weren't perfect. They carried their wounds like old photographs, faded, but never forgotten. But they walked forward anyway, side by side. Max didn't fix Rachel, and she didn't fix him. But they made space for each other's pain, and in that space, healing bloomed. Sometimes, love doesn't come to rescue you, it comes to walk beside you when you can't walk alone. Rachel and Max were living proof, broken souls, bound together by something whole.